Right, good morning, Year 2 law students. Today is April the 9th. It's a Sunday, and obviously it's Easter Sunday, so if I can wish you all a happy Easter and definitely have a wonderful day today. Right, so today's video is based on chapter 25 of the Law Year 1 textbook, and that's the topic on occupiers' liability. So if we go straight into basic definitions, if you get any question on occupiers' liability, you might have to explain very briefly who an occupier is. An occupier is simply anybody who has control over land. Suitable cases, Wheaton v. Laken. You'd have to explain the two main sources of law that regulate occupiers' liability. So obviously remember the Occupiers' Liability Act 1957 that deals with lawful visitors, and the Occupiers' Liability Act 1984 that deals with trespassers. So if we go back to dealing with the 1957 Act, do remember defining occupier, talk about premises, no specific definition under section 1.3 of the 57 Act. However, there are examples of what premises consist of. I think the key thing really is to make sure you understand the relevance of section 2.1 of the Occupiers' Liability Act 1957, which simply states that occupiers of land owe a common duty of care to lawful visitors. And then section 2.2, which slightly mitigates the responsibility on occupiers. So section 2.2 in the case of Laverton and Kaya Pasha simply state that premises has to be reasonably safe. So that's something for the benefit of the occupier potential defendant. Now, in addition to that, section 2.3a of the 57 Act places more responsibility on occupiers where children are involved. And also remember the word allurement, Glasgow Corporation and Taylor. If there are any allurements on occupiers' land, then they must make sure that potential visitors are warned about it. In addition to that, remember section 2.3b, which is to do with professionals who might come onto occupiers' land. There is less responsibility on the occupier because it's assumed that any independent contractor, self-employed person will have their own security, will be aware of any risks or dangers. So the responsibility on the occupier in relation to self-employed personnel who visit their premises is slightly less. So that essentially deals in a nutshell, and don't forget, I always say this is only a brief introduction. You must go back to the textbook, go back to all the notes that we've covered, PowerPoint slides and so on, and supplement your knowledge. Right, so in terms of defences, warning signs are always very important. So as an occupier, if you clearly put warning signs out and someone ignores those and gets injured, then that mitigates any case that might be brought against you. So that's very important indeed. Now, in addition to that, contributory negligence is quite important, and also consent. So really, consent, contributory negligence, and warning signs are all vital defences available for the potential occupier defendant. Right, now if we move very quickly, and as I say, I'm aware that I am only skipping over the basics of occupiers' liability, but if we move straight on to the 84 Act, the 1984 Act is essentially a law available for unlawful visitors or trespassers. And if you remember the two cases, Addy and Dumbrek and Harrington and British Railway Board, where the House of Lords as it was then used the practice statement of 1966 to vary the decision in the latter case in 1972, as in Harrington and British Railway Board, where compensation was awarded to a trespasser. So I think the key thing to remember for the Occupiers' Liability Act 1984 is section 1.3. You've got to remember three key points under section 1.3, and those 3 points are that the occupier defendant was aware of the presence of the claimant. The occupier defendant, this is the second point now, the occupier defendant was aware of danger on their premises. And the final point is the occupier defendant had not put out any warning signs. So 3 key things you've got to prove if a case is to succeed for the benefit of a trespasser. I think it goes without saying that most cases brought under the 1984 Act rarely succeed because there's so many hurdles to overcome. In addition to the 3 things you need to prove, if the danger was obvious, for example, then you're likely not to win your case. Also, depending on the time of day of the incident as well. So there are quite a few hurdles, and have a look at all the cases that go with or showing that it's not always easy to prove occupiers' liability. So in a nutshell, please remember that the 57 Act, the main statutory authority, or the main section is section 2.1. Occupiers owe lawful visitors a common duty of care. And the final point on the 84 Act, section 1.3, please remember that there are 3 things to prove. 1, that the defendant occupier knew of the presence of the claimant, the defendant occupier knew of the danger, and the defendant occupier did nothing to mitigate the danger or didn't put out any warning signs. And that is a quick summary of Occupiers' Liability Act. Please read chapter 25. But I think most importantly, it's Easter Sunday. So please, happy Easter. Have a wonderful Easter day, and all being well, I shall see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Good morning.